Okay, welcome to my third podcast ever. I'm here with the original cuz. He's like a cuz to me. I'm in his house today. This is Anthony Gargano, host of the Anthony Gargano Show on Philly Sports, PHLY. But you probably know him from The Fanatic or WIP, or because he's such a brilliant sports writer and has been doing that a lot longer than this, right?
Yes, yes. Well, welcome,
Thank you.
Matt.
Thanks
it's great to have
me.
family here at the PHLY studio. So
I know. I feel like we are really like the real cuz, right?
Well, we are.
Yeah.
So I know Nat's her father, who I loved. He was an amazing man. Nat's cousin, Joe Ben, is a dear friend of mine. I'm godfather to his son, Sammy. Like, it's all in the family. Much like South Philadelphia.
That's right.
We're all intertwined somehow.
Yeah. I always say when you grew up in South Philadelphia, your first cousins were like your siblings. Your second cousins were like your first cousins. Your third cousins were like your second cousins. And your neighbors were related.
Yes. Everybody's related.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It's beautiful.
Well, you're the original cuz. You're the original. You owned it. You own it. You know. Speaking of Joe Ben, I remember a story about you that he told me. Well, first of all, you and I both went to Temple Journalism, right?
Yes.
I did journalism and PR, and I took the corporate track of marketing PR, though I write more featurey stuff. But you really, to walk out of school and to walk onto like into a position for the AP in Chicago, a major market, you have some writing chops.
Well, I love to write. So I was an English major more than journalism. I always loved to write. That was always my thing.
Right.
And so, you know, I kind of made my way. While I was at Temple, I worked for a newspaper doing stringing and freelance stuff. And then I moved to Chicago. And then I was in Chicago for about 2.5 years and then got a job. Really, my first big break was at the New York Post.
Wow. But when you were in Chicago, so this is where I said, speaking of Joe Ben, he tells a funny story about you that I love. I remember roaring laughing when he told this story. You guys, you interviewed Jordan, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And all the guys, all your posse from South Philly, all the guys that I know came out and they got to go to the game, right? Could you imagine? I can't even imagine interviewing Jordan. I mean, that alone, right? It's got to be like a career high. So you had to write the story, but the guys wanted to party.
Yes.
And so you locked yourself in the bathroom of the hotel or your apartment or wherever you guys were. Right. And my cousin said, we're knocking on the door. Yo, whoa, come on, we want to go out. And you're like in the bathroom. He said, what are you writing in there? My left foot at the time that movie was, right? How was that to interview like these
Oh my God. Yeah, it was back then. I remember this story. It's hysterical. So we went to all of my buddies come out, right? So Joe Ben and Tooch and Boo and Vinny and everybody's out, my cousin, and everybody's hanging out. We went to Notre Dame Penn State. I was covering the game as a freelancer, and it was like a big game. It was Notre Dame Penn State. It was a big deal. So I wanted to make it sing. So, you know, they're downstairs. They crazy. Like, they broke onto the field. They're playing football on the field at Notre Dame Stadium, right? You're looking up, screaming, what are you doing? I was like one of the last people in the press box because I'm making sure everything. So then they start calling me my left foot. Oh. Were you right, my left foot? Right. Then later that weekend, I had another story to write. And so it was late, and I had a studio apartment, and I had this little handy, it was a word processor. It wasn't even a computer. It was before laptops. And I was in the bathroom because they were all out drinking and everything else in my apartment. And so I was writing in the bathroom, and they're like, what are you, nuts? I'm like, well, I got to get it done.
Oh, I must have conflated two stories.
They were both the same kind of.
I thought you were interviewing Jordan that night.
No, that was another game.
Oh, okay.
Another time. But I brought them. So I brought Joe Ben one time to we were in, I get him a press pass. And so we're in the locker room, and he's got an empty, I give him a recorder to look the part, and it's an empty tape recorder. Right? And he's holding it up, and then he whispers. He's like, listen, if I snuck Michael Jordan right now, punch him in the face, I would be on every news. I would be everywhere. I started laughing. I go, do it.
Yeah, you'd be probably dead too. You won't be here to tell the story, but you would. You'd be here to tell the story.
We had all kinds of crazy
Yeah.
times. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I really appreciate you bringing up my dad because he loved
what
you.
a good
He
man.
loved talking sports with you. He was a sports fanatic. He was also the funniest man I ever met in my life. Really should have been in stand up instead of working in brokerage, but. He made us all laugh outside of work and in work. But he loved sports. And when I was growing up, it was the Flyers. When we were growing up, the Flyers it was their heyday, the 70s, when they won the Stanley Cup. My father had all daughters. And we were on the side of Broad Street that you couldn't get cable television yet.
Yeah.
So they had to rig something. I don't even know what they did. But all the boys from the neighborhood would be in our house watching the game. And there wasn't a Saturday afternoon that you wouldn't see my dad playing stickball outside with all the boys.
That's what it was.
He loved every part of sports.
You were from the east side of Broad Street.
Yes.
The west side of Broad Street, we had it. We had Prism.
Right, yeah. Prism. So we're connected, obviously, for family. Joe Ben, you wrote a book about the underbelly of the NFL, right?
Yeah.
And was that your first published book?
I did one called The Great Philadelphia Fan Book.
Okay.
I did a book on the Super Bowl '04 that was, I forget the title, Sunday Pilgrimage.
Right.
And I kind of equated the Eagles to a religion.
Oh, wow.
And I used, all my friends went down for the game, and it was kind of like this whole pilgrimage. And I kind of compared it to the Great Awakening by the Gasper River in the 1800s.
Wow.
So this was by the St. Charles River in Jacksonville. So that was the site of the Super Bowl in '04.
Yeah,
and so you kind of make the comparison of the religious undertones that sports has. Because I'm a big believer that sports builds churches, right?
Yeah.
It brings people together.
Yep.
There's no
common bond.
Yeah, there's no standing, right? Like, doesn't matter about race, about creed.
Right.
It doesn't matter about economic standing. It's like, I'm an Eagles fan, you're an Eagles fan. Together, we're family.
Right, exactly. Speaking of the games, I feel like I'm in your house today, right? I feel like I have this sage sports thing, and I'm compelled to say one thing. You correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just really a novice, but I love football. I feel like the Eagles this year, they are, if not a second quarter, a second half team, but not in like the rope-a-dope kind of strategy kind of way. It almost feels like this, whatever the energy is or the mojo that they have this season, it's like they pick up and they get more fired up as the game is going on. So even if they have like a slow first quarter, it really feels to me.
Yes.
Is that an accurate
Yeah, it's very accurate. For a couple of reasons. One, the defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, is a guy that is great at making adjustments. And you saw it. In fact, we're taping this the day after the Rams game.
Right.
So during the Rams game, the Rams went down the field the first two drives of the game, and then Fangio made his adjustments and was able to shut it down. And the other thing is they run the ball, right? So what happens when you run the ball is that you weaken the defense, but it doesn't take effect until the second half.
Right.
And so you saw
they're picking up
Saquon.
momentum.
Right. So you saw
Saquon's on
Saquon.
fire.
So all that hitting from the offensive line will open things up in the second half. And that's kind of what you see, which is very astute.
I watch a lot of football on the weekends. And then, a couple of years ago, I think it was during the pandemic, I started to watch all the other games. I started to, I would watch the Eagles because I love the Eagles, and then I would start to watch whatever the next game was, and the next game was, and then I would listen to the color commentators, and I'd say, oh, that's a screen. Now I get it. Or, I hear them adding whatever, they were talking about.
All the verbiage,
all the verbiage, and start to get it made sense. I hope Slay's okay, But they were making changes in real time that you can see on the field that were winning strategies.
Look, that's Fangio. He's really good at adjustments. They're good.
Yes.
It's going to be a fun, I think they have a chance.
I love watching it. It's exciting, and I love to see them picking up the momentum as the game goes on. It's just so
it's
exciting.
The best. And, what it does for the city's vibe, right? It just makes people happy. You can see on a Monday when they win, there's a happiness. All of a sudden, you're at a stop sign. Go ahead, you go.
Right.
There's that kind of give and take. it's really in the soil
Yes.
of this town.
Right.
Sports matters.
Yes. And you, like you said, you made a great parallel, a metaphor with church, like, something uplifting that people can come together
Well, and also,
on
right, it
without
brings
any...
everybody together organically, right?
Right, yeah.
It's not fake. It's not,
right.
it's something that's real, and you have a common bond.
Right.
And if you think about it, what's church? Church is the gathering of community, right? To service God, but God's happy that we're together and enjoying, what we're seeing.
Church of the NFL. Yeah, Church of the NFL, right. I would think of a scene in Silver Linings Playbook that really depicts that well. When Bradley Cooper's therapist, he doesn't realize that he's an Eagles fan. He's painted, like he's got the green face, and he shows up at a game, and then they all get into a brawl, even the therapist. Did you ever see that?
Yes,
yeah,
it's great. It's perfect.
It is perfect. And you're going to be making one of those. So tell us, what's your next? I know you have a lot of irons on the fire, but creatively and writing-wise, you're writing some script, you're working on a series. Tell us a little about that.
So, it's one of the things I've been doing it for years. I like to say I'm a failed filmmaker.
No, we're just getting started.
It's only been 20 years. So what happens is I wrote a piece called The Bottom, and it was about the junior black mafia of the 80s. And it's a really cool kind of story. And the producer I was working with in LA says to me, hey, do you have anything else? It was during the pandemic. I said, yeah, I'm dying to do this piece about the bicentennial and Philadelphia, because what we see now is completely, like, the city was really, I don't know if it was a narco city, but it was that
downtrodden,
kind of, it was rough, right? And it was a different time.
Right,
and,
very gritty, blue collar.
And there was a heavy crime element, right? It was Crime Town, USA. I mean, for many reasons. One, the port system, right? You're in the shadows of New York, so you're there. And it was part of the whole thing. So I devised a story about the mafia, the Angelo Bruno, and what was going on at the time, and then the Black Mafia and the Nation of Islam, and of course Frank Rizzo, who was like a Mussolini character. Like, so you have all this going on at one period, and it's important because it was in 1976, so it's the 200th anniversary of the country. So it really looks
and the place where the country was born.
Correct.
It's kind of a juxtaposition.
Right, in the shadows of Independence Mall, the Liberty Bell, the whole thing. Right. You have all this going on. It's really about the assimilation of immigrants, right? Because Philadelphia's a city of neighborhoods. You have, the Italians like us, the Irish, the Polish, right? The African Americans. And really that was the city. And each ethnic clan had their own underworld, right? Like the Irish had the K&A gang,
even
the Union
Jewish
guys.
Mafia.
Well, and that's a big part of it because the Jewish Mafia, most of them had divested out of the rackets, but they were still heavy in it because of the early, early 1900s. The Jewish Mafia was very prominent. And so this whole world existed in 1976, and it doesn't exist today, not to anything like that. And it's fascinating, and it really impacted everyday life. Not all bad. Like, there was good and bad, right? Like, there was a lot of things. Right. It was the way
like I can think of a good thing.
Of this country. I mean, this country was built like that.
I could think of a good thing. In the old time mafia days when we were growing up and there was still that old school mafia presence, that people always think that all Italians are mafia. I got that my whole life, and that it's really such a small percentage. But it was really the civilian population was not really impacted, but we were safer.
Yes.
Because they didn't want drugs in where they lived in our neighborhood, or prostitution or other things that were criminal behavior.
Also helped out, listen, it's an old thing. And whether it's the Italians, whether it's the Black Mafia, whether it was the Irish, it was, hey, we'll take care of the neighborhood, because you take care of the neighborhood, nobody's going to say anything, right? So you have kind of free reign,
right?
To kind of,
it's one hand washes the other,
right? You built up the loyalty. So if there's an old lady that is air conditions out and she's got no air in the summertime, they'll fix it for you, right? Like, it's
exactly.
But the streets were safer in that sense. There were a kind of an arm of Law and Order in a lot of ways, because that's how people don't know.
In a mildly vigilante kind of way.
Well, that's it. Like the mafia started because of the Sicily was occupied by French, by the French. And so I know the whole story. It's just really interesting. There was a little girl who was brutalized, and the Sicilian men got together, and they were, again, the French had occupied them, and so they were trying to expel them from the island. And at that point, they spoke the Sicilian dialect, but they didn't know certain key words, and that's how they discerned who was true Sicilian, who was not, and they were able to expel.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
And
that was the Black Hand, they called it.
Yes,
then, right? The Black
and
Hand.
as the woman, as the girl's mother was asking for help, she was running down the street yelling, "Mafia, mafia, mafia," which was like my daughter, my filia,
my daughter, mafia. Right?
Yeah, and so
this became mafia,
which became a dialect,
I didn't know that.
And that's how it started.
Wow, you're a wealth of information here.
And it's interesting.
It really
and so
is.
So the premise of my show is really about this standing, right? And it's like where they were in a business sense, and knowing that the government was going to get in on the rackets, right?
Yes.
Like all the stuff from loans to gambling that we saw. We saw the proliferation of lottery, of what we know now as DraftKings and
even though my book
FanDuel.
is like a lighthearted book, Lying Down with Dogs, I do touch on a lot of these things, but more in the 80s and 90s as a retrospect, but even though it's a lighthearted thing. But I want to just ask you, first of all, the content is fantastic, but you need the storyteller, which is you, right? So what is the name? Do you want to share it? Or
It's called In Blood.
In Blood.
And so we'll see.
All right,
I hate to talk about it because I've been down the road many times and nothing has really reached.
But I don't know. I feel like when I just read a little excerpt that you shared with me, that this is gripping. It's really got
Thank
some
you.
teeth,
Yeah,
we
got a hope.
And mafia sells, right?
Yeah.
Mob story sell.
Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate you joining me today. I feel like my dad's
Oh my
here with
God,
us.
are you
He's
kidding
so
me?
excited to be here with the original cut.
That's it.
Gargano. Thank you.